Three guys were discussing what they wanted said about them at their funerals. And the first guy said, well, I'd like people to point out my career successes and what a good guy I was, the good things I did for people. And the second guy said, well, I would like for people to say what a great family guy I was. I loved my wife, I loved my kids, I gave them everything I could to help them succeed in life. And the third guy thought about it and he said, I'd like for someone to say, his body just moved. Easter is when Jesus' body moved. And it didn't just move, it came fully back to life, not as some crazed, brain-eating zombie. I've got a brother-in-law, and he's not a follower of Jesus, but he teases with it. And his conception of the resurrection is that Jesus came back as a zombie, and he finds that hysterical. And I find it almost blasphemous and very sad that he can't get beyond that. Jesus Christ came back fully victorious over death and the grave and sin, and inviting everyone else to join him in that spectacular resurrection hope. Now, it's hard for us to grasp today, to fully understand how ridiculous a concept this is, how bizarre this was. Nobody back in the first century was looking for anything remotely close to what Jesus accomplished on that first Resurrection Sunday. We've grown up with the idea of Easter for generations. We're used to it. It's almost become a cliche. It's so familiar. It's almost boring. I talk with preachers all the time, and they're like, I got to come up with a new angle this year on Easter because it's the same thing over and over. We know the ending. No shocker there. But those first followers, whoa, they were completely unprepared for the resurrection. Jesus had predicted it time after time after time in all four Gospels, which are the accounts of his life. There's only 4 books that talk about his life. It's the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And over, the Son of Man must go into Jerusalem. He's going to be handed over to the chief priests, and they're going to crucify him. But on the third day, he's going to rise from the dead. How did these guys miss it? I think it's actually a testimony to the validity of the New Testament that it portrays the original followers of Jesus so clueless. If you're going to invent a religion and you're going to come up with your original heroes that would eventually be called saints, wouldn't you have them a lot smarter than these guys? A few hours after the resurrection had occurred, after it had been discovered, rumors were beginning to fly. The word in the street was, he ain't dead anymore. What? Of course he's dead. We read this account in Luke chapter 24. That very day, 2 of them were going to a village named Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and they were talking with each other about all these things that had happened. And while they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. And their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, what is this conversation you're holding with each other as you walk? And they stood still looking sad. And then one of them named Cleopas. And it's interesting, Cleopas is also named as possibly one of the witnesses to the crucifixion in John's gospel. His name there is Clopas. Here it's Cleopas. Could very well be the same person. So you might be talking about, possibly some scholars think, even a husband and wife, disciple pair going to Emmaus. Quite possibly both had been eyewitnesses of the crucifixion. Cleopas answered him, are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who doesn't know the things that have happened there in these days? And I love Jesus here. This is actually, to me, quite humorous. Sometimes we miss the humanness of Jesus. I haven't seen the Chosen series, how they portray this one. I hope it's lighthearted, because this is funny. You ever pull one over on a coworker? You ever like to do pranks, and you're just kind of waiting to see how it pans? That's Jesus here. This is, I'm sorry, I see this as hysterical. He's playing stupid. Haven't you heard what just happened? Where have you been? Have you been asleep? Have you been living under a rock? Huh? Tell me more. What things, he said. And they said to him concerning Jesus of Nazareth, a man who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. Parenthetically, just like he said would happen. Hello, does none of this ring a bell to these guys? But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Those three words are in black for a reason, and we are going to come back to them, and they are going to form the focus of where I want to go this morning. So if you have your scriptures, anyone remember paper Bibles? You used to hold them out and flip them open and write in them. Anymore, they're on our smartphones or our tablets or whatever. But you want to somehow highlight those three words. We had hoped that he would be the one to redeem Israel. Redeem means to buy back. Yes, and besides all this, it's now the third day since these things have happened. The third day. Didn't the third day ring a bell? Hello? How many times did Jesus say it? On the third day. Moreover, some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning, and when they didn't find his body, they came back saying that they'd even seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. And some of those who were with us went to the tomb, and they found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see. And he said to them, "O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself." And so they drew near to the village to which they were going. He acted as if he were going further, but they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, for it's toward evening, and the day is now far spent." And so he went in to stay with them, and when he was at table with them, he took the bread and blessed it, and broke it, and gave it to them, which kind of echoes another event just a few days before, maybe. And their eyes were opened. And holy cow, Batman. They recognized him. And poof, he vanished from their sight. That's just freaky. And they said to each other, "Didn't our hearts burn within us while he talked to us on the road, while he opened to us the scriptures?" It's like, he sounded so familiar. What he was saying, it sounded like what Jesus used to say. Duh! And they rose that same hour, probably lost their deposit on the hotel room, and went scooting back to Jerusalem. They found the 11, the apostles, and those who were with them gathered together, saying, "The Lord has risen indeed. He's appeared to Simon." And then they told what had happened on the road and how he was known to them in the breaking of the bread. I've taken a lot of Bible classes and listened to a lot of lectures. I would love to have been in on that Bible study. Jesus walking with these guys, explaining Old Testament scriptures, and we don't know which ones. We can guess. And I can just see him rattling them off and then saying, "That's me." Maybe he went to Genesis 3:15. We looked at this a week or two ago. We called it the Proto-Evangelium. It's Latin for first gospel, where God curses Satan and says, "I'll put enmity between you and the woman and between your offspring and hers, and he will crush your head," which we said was a fatal wound, "and you will strike his heel." Satan will just give you a flesh wound, but this seed of woman is going to kill him. Maybe he went there. Maybe he went to Genesis 12, where God promised Abraham that all nations on earth would be blessed through him. It was never just about God blessing the nation of Israel. But God chose the Jews to bless the entire world. Maybe he went to Psalm 22, where we read, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from me?" Saying, so far from the words of my groaning. Where he says, "All who see me mock me. They hurl insults. They shake their heads. A band of evil men has encircled me. They pierced my hands and my feet. They divide my garments among them and cast lots for my clothing." Maybe Jesus went to that passage. Guys, it was about me. Maybe he went to Psalm 69, which says, "Scorn has broken my heart, has left me helpless. I looked for sympathy. There was none. I looked for comforters. I found none. They put gall in my food and gave me vinegar for my thirst." Remember, they put the stick of vinegar on a sponge up to Jesus when he was on the cross. And Jesus going, "That's me." How do you manipulate that? He's on a cross. He can't do anything. And yet a soldier puts vinegar on a stick. Jesus going, "This was written about me 1,000 years ago." Maybe he went to Isaiah 53. I have to believe he went to Isaiah 53, the suffering servant passage that the Jewish people today still can't understand. There's no good answer for what this is. But Jesus Christ fits it perfectly. After the suffering of his soul, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. By his knowledge, my righteous servant will justify many. He will bear their iniquities. I can see Jesus reading all of that Isaiah 53 and going, "It's me." Or maybe he went to Jeremiah 31, which talks about God's promise of a new covenant. He says, "I'm going to make a new covenant with the nation of Israel one day. It won't be written on stone. It'll be written on their hearts." And what did he say at the Last Supper? "This is the new covenant in my blood." I can see Jesus saying, "What we went through a couple nights ago, this is what I was talking about. It's me." Maybe he went to Deuteronomy 18, where God promised that a new prophet like Moses would come and the people should listen to him. And the Jewish people even today are waiting for that promise. They know Messiah will be a prophet like Moses. Regarded as one of the greatest prophets in Israel's history and known especially for delivering the Jewish people from bondage. And Jesus delivers the human race from the bondage of sin. I can see him reading that passage and going, "Ta-da! You guys get it yet? Shall I go on?" Zechariah 9, Israel's king come riding on a donkey colt, and a blood covenant would be made that would free the prisoners. Hello, that's me. Maybe he went to Exodus 12 that says the people would be delivered from Egyptian slavery by the blood of an innocent lamb. This did happen at Passover, and scholars believe that Jesus was crucified at the exact same time of the day that the Passover lamb was being slain, and not a one of their bones would have been broken. And we're explicitly told in John's gospel that none of Jesus' bones were broken. He is the Passover lamb. And salvation is found by being covered by his blood that the Jews had to paint on the doorposts. And we could spend a lot of time looking at those scriptures. But we're not. I want to focus this morning on verse 21. But we had hoped. We had hoped. Some of the saddest words in the Bible. Words of disillusionment, words of disappointment, words of dejection. You can imagine what their prayer life has been the past 72 hours. Did you call us to join you just so we could fail? Did you get our hopes up for nothing? You promised us it would be worth it. We left everything. We left everyone. We left our jobs. We left our careers. We left our friends. We left our favorite hobbies. We left everything familiar. Was it all a lie? Was this all a hoax? Was it all a waste? Was this some sort of joke? Jesus? You had us convinced that you were special, all those healings, all those miracles. Where's that power when you needed it most? You just hung there. And now they say your tomb is empty. These guys and gals are totally and utterly befuddled. And I don't know if there's an exponential word for befuddlement, but that would fit. Did you ever have a we had hoped experience? We had hoped the diagnosis would be different. We had hoped that the chemo would work. We had hoped that he wasn't lying this time. Or she. We had hoped he would beat the addiction this time. We had hoped that that investment would pay off. We had hoped that this job would change everything and make things better. We had hoped that more money would fix things. We had hoped that our love could be rekindled. We had hoped we could get pregnant. We had hoped that the adoption would go through. We had hoped that a new pastor would make the church grow and thrive. We had hoped that our friends would help us out. We had hoped that our kids would pick really good spouses. I suspect the we had hoped motif could go on and on. It would be interesting to hear some of your we had hopes. Have you had a we had hoped moment? An Emmaus Road moment? When you eventually realize that in spite of your disappointment and disillusionment with God, now you can look back and recognize that he was doing something that you never would have imagined. Or maybe you're Emmaus Road, maybe you're still on it. That's you. That's where you are right now. I'm here on Sunday morning because it's Easter and the family dragged me here, but doggone it, I got some issues with God and he's got some splaining to do. Because I'm not sitting. I have friends who are right there. And to be honest, I've been there a time or two myself. Maybe for the life of you, you can't see God working and you're filled with nothing but soul-crushing questions and wondering if this whole God thing is nothing but a lie or maybe just a made-up fairy tale for people to make sense of life, but deep down inside, it's just a bunch of hooey. And that is a legitimate question. I don't say that to beat you up and make you feel bad that you're questioning God. I'm saying you are in good company. You are in apostolic company. And in a couple years, maybe there'll be a saint before your name. St. James. Can't decide if I like St. James better or King James. I think of Jim Elliot and his 4 friends back in the 1950s that moved to South America to take the gospel to the hostile Indian tribe down there, and they were all speared to death. And you wonder if some of their family but we had hoped to have a kingdom impact. And now 4 godly men are dead and their families are completely wrecked for the rest of their lives. Do you think maybe some Luke 24 questions were thrown at God then? By the way, if you haven't read the story and the books of Elizabeth Elliot, and you're wrestling with this question, highly recommend. Read how they went through their Emmaus Road moment. Terry and Eileen Tanner moved to Prince Edward Island to lead a church and hopefully retire about 30 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. He was a minister at a church in town where I was ministering up there, and we did a lot of things together. He was a great guy, lots of energy, a born leader. And yet in 1999, he died at the age of 50 of a heart attack. He's a servant of God. He's a preacher. He's building God's kingdom, and we had hoped to finish our lives on his wife's beloved island, and she still lives there, and she's still a widow. Maybe you had hoped that your kids would grow up and have a huge kingdom impact. You took them to church every Sunday, you read the Bible every night, you prayed with them, but now they're grown up and they barely darken the doors of a church at all, and you don't understand it. God, we had hoped. And the answer that comes back from heaven is crickets. We do this all the time as a society, don't we? We had hoped, we hold out high hopes only to see them dashed. What's coming up here in a couple weeks in the NFL? It's the NFL draft. And if you follow football, you know, the fans are going, you know, we had hoped that this draft pick would be the one to take us to the Super Bowl this year, or next year, or any time. Or in politics, we had hoped that this candidate would change things for the better. In Salem, many of you are hoping we got an election this year. You got a new governor. You got a new legislature. Or maybe even in Washington, midterm elections coming up. We had hoped. Things just keep going on the same. Or even in world politics, there's a picture up there of Ronnie Reagan. We had hoped that détente would usher in a really long period of international peace. And yet, you flip on the news today, didn't work. Our wait appears to be in vain. Our world gets darker and darker and more out of control, and God seems so far away. Have I got you fully depressed yet? Could I paint a bleaker picture? So I came across a Washington Post article from Weingarten. called Pearls Before Breakfast. Can one of the nation's great musicians cut through the fog of a DC rush hour? Let's find out. And at 7:51 in the morning on January 12th, 2007, one of the world's finest classical musicians playing some of the most elegant music ever written on one of the most valuable violins ever made, handcrafted in 1713 by Antonio Stradivari. You ever hear of him? Worth $3.5 million. It had been stolen twice, one time for 20 years, and the thief finally fessed up on his deathbed, and they got it back. And 39-year-old Joshua Bell got a hold of it, and he was recognized as the finest violinist in the world. And he began playing at L'Enfant metro station in downtown Washington, D.C. I know it well. My wife and I used to love to go to D.C. when we lived in Maryland all the time. The writer says it was an experiment in context, perception, and priorities. In a banal setting, at an inconvenient time, would beauty transcend? I put the article on my Facebook page if you want to go take a look at it, or you can just Google it. It's a long article, but it's really cool. During this 43-minute concert, only 7 people stopped for a minute or more. 27 people donated a total of $32. One woman tossed in a 20, but they didn't count her money because she recognized him. And she had seen him at concert 2 weeks prior. And she couldn't believe that here he was busking at a metro stop. 1,070 people were oblivious that they were listening to a free concert by a musician who makes $1,000 a minute. A minute. That was not a miss. I didn't say the wrong thing. And they videotaped the whole thing, and then they caught some of the people outside and told them that they were doing a research on your metro experience. Could they have their phone number and call them back in a couple days? And it's really fascinating, the responses that they got. But when you sped the video up, so you've got all these people coming in and out of the railway station there, the metro stop, even at this accelerated pace, he writes, though the fiddler's movements remain fluid and graceful, he seems so apart from his audience, unseen, unheard, otherworldly, that you find yourself thinking he's not really there. A ghost. And only then do you see it. He is the one who is real. They are the ghosts. And I read that and I thought, wow. That's where we are so much of the time. He concludes, if we can't take the time out of our life to stay a moment and listen to one of the best musicians on earth play some of the best music ever written, if the surge of modern life so overpowers us that we are deaf and blind to something like that, he asks this question, then what else are we missing? And I'm like, yeah, we're missing God, man. And it's interesting, the only people that consistently stopped to listen to this world-class violinist, the only people that consistently stopped were, who do you think? Kids. Who, I think Jesus at one point said something about becoming like little children because they see the magic. They hear the music of heaven in ways that we have lost. But their parents hurried them along. They had places to go. And interestingly, many of the adults, this was back in the day of iPods. What violinist? I don't hear any violinist. God is the one who's real. We just We just don't see him. Psalm 33:6 says, by the word of the Lord the heavens were made, and by the breath of his mouth all their hosts. By the word of the Lord. God spoke the world into existence. All the stars, all the galaxies. And the more we put out these super duper telescopes that can look for miles and miles and miles, the more we humans are just amazed at how large and expansive and intricate and complex and finely tuned this place is, this universe. And I love C.S. Lewis in his little book. By the way, if you're looking for books to read to your kids or your grandkids, or you want to get them a nice set, the Chronicles of Narnia are simply delightful. The videos are kind of cheesy. Don't bother with them. They're okay, but boy, there's just something about the books. I loved reading to my kids when they would let me lie on the bed and read to them, which has been quite a while now. But in The Magician's Nephew, C.S. Lewis has Aslan sing the world into existence. I love that picture. Aslan in C.S. Lewis's writings was a lion. He represented Jesus Christ, and he has him. Wouldn't you love to hear that tune? Wouldn't you love to have that on your playlist? Wouldn't you love to play that in your car on the way to work? I have a feeling you'd have a really good day. And we foolish humans, we rock right on by. God is singing the world into existence. I think he's still singing now. New lives into existence. And we miss it, consumed or overwhelmed by life. And there's this divine concert that's going on all around us, and we just don't see it. Hear me well, I have learned, and it's just me, but I have learned that God is often at his best when our dreams are at their worst. God is often at his best when your dreams are at their worst. Like the two people in Luke 24, these two followers of Jesus, in the midst of the worst disappointment you can imagine. And some of you are thinking about that right now. You're living it right now, or you're remembering what that was like. In the midst of the worst disappointment you can imagine, it's easy to become convinced that God isn't working, that he doesn't care, or worse, that he doesn't even exist. But God was up to something. As these disciples were wallowing in self-pity and confusion, God was doing his best work. And they're sitting there going, maybe it was a waste. Maybe we're idiots. We were duped. He was such a good teacher. We had hoped. And here comes Jesus. I love that picture. Jesus was accomplishing the very purpose he'd brought the world into existence for in the first place. Jesus created this world and put human beings on it, so that he could show his love by dying for their rebellion. Just one scripture, 1 Peter 1:18. The Apostle Peter, who's speaking from personal experience here, remember, he was one of the ones that had these questions. For you know that God paid a ransom to save you from the empty life you inherited from your ancestors, and it was not paid with mere gold or silver, which lose their value. It was the precious blood of Christ, the sinless, spotless Lamb of God. God chose him as your ransom long before the world began. This wasn't some plan B. But now in these last days, he has been revealed for your sake. Through Christ, you have come to, and here we go, trust in God. You have placed your faith and hope. Trust, faith, hope in God, because he raised Christ from the dead and gave him great glory. Somehow my underlines got skewed there. I'm sorry. What Easter tells us is God is closer than you think. God is the God of great reversals. We had hoped God would show up. We had hoped Jesus was more than words, but he was. He did. He is. And when they finally got it, it changed everything. For their lives, they would go on, many of the early followers, to die for Jesus Christ because they were convinced that he was alive. And it changed the world. We measure our calendar now before Christ, after his death. Which takes us into a time of communion. Verse 30, when he was at table with them, he took the bread and he blessed it and he broke it and he gave it to them, and their eyes were opened and they recognized him. You know, what do I want people to say about me at my funeral? Which I don't know why I find myself thinking about that a lot, and I'm not as old as a lot of you. I hope people say he never stopped believing. I hope people say he really tried to see Jesus and what God was up to in every situation. As we take communion this morning, my prayer is that your eyes might be opened as well. Maybe for the first time, maybe you've been a follower of Jesus and yet you have kind of slipped into this comatose, nothing matters. I hope that you'll see Jesus. That you would recognize the God who is closer than you ever realized, and that your I had hoped experience to, I still hope. I do hope. I still believe. Father God, we are grateful, blown away by the honesty of your word, the honesty of the experiences of your early followers. And yet we are encouraged that you understand our humanity. You understand that we're just thick sometimes. It takes a lot to get through us. We're so full of ourselves, and we're so full of all these distractions and all these priorities that have nothing to do with you, that it's hard sometimes to realize what you're up to. And my prayer this morning and for every Lord's Day from now on, that as we partake of your body and your blood that represents the new covenant that you promised, we would recognize that you are close and working. And you have an ending in mind that is beyond our wildest imaginations. May we never stop believing that. In Jesus' name. If you're a follower of Jesus, you're invited to come up, take a cup. You want to take the top off first and the wafers there, and then take the next one and the juices there. You can sip it here, you can throw it out there, you can take it back to your pew, however you want to do it. And if you're not a follower of Jesus and this is all still kind of murky, just take this time to talk to God about whatever's on your heart that you need to talk to God about. But this is open for all who call themselves followers of Jesus Christ.